I would actually just really like to start with the genesis of West Side Story, how it was supposed to be, how you got involved.
Have you talked to Arthur?
Players, yes.
Okay.
I've interviewed Hal.
Okay.
It'll be nice, and then there'll be Jerry.
Okay,
So,
so Arthur's told you. Okay.
Yeah, but that's nice not to have just one voice do it.
All right.
So you can kind of,
Well, the genesis, I came in after it had been started. So when I came in on it, let's see, I'll tell you how I got involved. In the course of auditioning as a fledgling songwriter around town, I came to the attention of two producers named Marty Gable and Henry Margulies, and they were going to do a musical of Serenade. And Arthur Lawrence was to write the book, and Lenny and Jerry were to be involved, and they had dropped out. So they were looking for a songwriter. So I auditioned. Then the project never came to fruition because Warner Brothers decided to do it as a movie. And I ran into Arthur about 6 months later. Actually, I ran into once before that at a dinner party, but essentially it all happened on the opening night of a play called Isle of Goats. And at the opening night party, I was not at the play, but I was invited to the party by Bert Sheveloff. And so I was waiting for Bert, and the guests were starting to arrive, and I had nobody to talk to because I didn't know anybody. It was a rather high-toned party at Ruth Ford and Zachary Scott's. And Arthur was standing there, and we reacquainted ourselves. And I asked him what he was doing. He said he was about to begin the musical of Romeo and Juliet with Leonard Bernstein and Jerome Robbins. And I said, and who's doing the lyrics? And he literally smote his forehead like that and said, gee, I never thought of you. And we've been looking for a lyric writer because Betty and Adolph it seems as if they can't get out of a Hollywood contract that they have, and therefore they can't do it, and we need somebody. So why don't you go up and play your things for Leonard Bernstein tomorrow? And so I did, and Lenny said, I will know within a week's time whether Betty and Adolph can do this or not, and I'll let you know. And I felt mixed about it. I was flattered and delighted, and I really did it because I wanted to meet Leonard Bernstein. I thought it would be interesting. Oh, I actually had met him once before. And I was reluctant to just do lyrics because I really wanted to compose. And Oscar Hammerstein, who was my mentor, advised me to take the job if I got it, because he thought it would be a good experience for me to be involved with people of this kind of professionality and talent. And so I said yes. And when I said yes, Lenny wanted to write lyrics too, and he started writing lyrics. We were writing lyrics separately but together. And then over a period of time, the lyrics, with maybe an exception of one or two lines, were all mine. So I ended up just doing the lyrics myself. And so that's how it started. When I met with Arthur officially, the first day of officially going to work, Arthur had an outline of the piece on about 3 closely typed pages. And so I came in on after Arthur had started to outline the plot, but before any actual writing had been done. And Lenny had written actually a tune which became cool. And a lot of the music in West Side Story was stuff that had been thrown out of Candide, which he had written earlier. And in fact, then when he got back to work on Candide, which happened while we were writing West Side Story, some of the West Side Story stuff got into Candide. So the music went back and forth.
Can you be specific?
Sure. Oh Happy We was originally, part of that was a duet for Tony and Maria in the bridal shop. One Hand, One Heart was written for Candide. Let me think of some other things. Krupke, the tune of Krupke had been written for Candide, or part of it anyway. I have to think. I'm a little slow today. Let me just try to think of the others. There are about 5 examples.
What was your first meeting with Lenny like? What did you do?
I don't remember. My first meeting really was with Arthur, and talking about how to utilize the songs. Lenny and I generally tended to work. Lenny liked to work together in this room in his apartment, which was the only dark room. It looked out on an air shaft, and he had deliberately chosen that because he didn't want visual distractions or oral ones, and so it was quite a gloomy room and exactly right for work. But he liked to sit and ponder with somebody in the room. I didn't like to do that. I wanted to go home and write. So we worked, I'd say, 2 days a week in his studio, and a lot on the phone from my apartment to his.
How do you do that? How does that process work?
Well, it's difficult to describe because I would discuss with Arthur at great length what the song should be about, and then get together with Lenny and maybe give him some lines, or we would discuss the song and he would come up with a musical idea. There's one example only in the show of a lyric that I just wrote cold and he said it cold, which is a boy like that. And one example where I got the music, which was Krupke, and I just set the music. But otherwise it was back and forth. And a lot of discussions. Actually, one of the things we did was he was an anagram player and I was an anagram player. And I had never played cutthroat anagrams, which is a very aggressive form of the game and a much better one than the polite version. And I got into playing anagrams with him, and it helped relieve any tensions that would come in the collaboration. Also, I introduced him to the crossword puzzle and The Listener, which is was a BBC publication. And they're very tricky British puzzles. And so that would usually arrive on Thursday, so we would meet on Thursday and spend the first couple of hours doing the puzzle together, and then we would get to work. But generally, it was a matter of, if we were together in the room, I would perhaps ad-lib some lines or ideas, or he would ad-lib something to the piano. But generally, once we got the notion, we would go off and develop it separately and then come back separately and then check on the phone with each other to be sure that the form and the rhythms were what we had decided. If he'd had his way, we would have always worked in the room together. And if I'd had my way, we'd always work separately.
That's very interesting. Well, he loved to be with people. He loved to communicate. I've said this in a couple of interviews, but I still can't get over it. And he once said that if he couldn't communicate or share an experience, it basically didn't happen for him. I mean, sunset didn't mean anything unless he had somebody.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Well, that explains this because I figured he wanted company in terms of the collaboration. But, first of all, since I'm a piano player myself, if I'm writing a lyric, even when I was writing with Lenny, I would occasionally go to the piano, and even if I was dumbing a tune, even if it wasn't his tune, I would do it. But I couldn't do that in a room with him. And often, if he would sometimes trance out to think of music, and he didn't always write at the piano. He wrote a lot at the piano, but he would also play it in his head, and so we would sit there in silence while he played it in his head, so to speak, and I would scribble a little on the pad, but it was too frustrating. It was too frustrating for me to not be able to either go to the piano or wander, do something.
Well, I wondered about that because, you are obviously also a great composer. Was that difficult? Were there times when you would give him a lyric and he would write something and that you had heard it completely differently?
No, not often. Although in the case of A Boy Like That, when he came up with that vamp, I must say I was surprised. That was not what I was expecting. No, occasionally I would criticize, so to speak. I would make suggestions to the music. I'd say, don't you think there's a little too much B flat going on there? Could we maybe arch the phrase up on this word or something like that? But no. It's funny. My memory is of all those days of writing is blurry, and the impression I have is that I would say a line, and he would go and play something, and then we would talk about the line, and we'd talk about the way the music was going. It seemed to grow organically by coming together. And when we had enough material, which usually we would have at the end of a day, then I could go home and develop, and he could go to the piano and develop, and then we'd get back together a couple of days later. and he would have developed the tune, and I would have developed the lyric. And but we always sort of knew where we were going. It was a very easy collaboration, very easy.
So could you slide to your right an inch, believe it or not?
Really?
Me?
I'm trying so hard to
Oh,
get
do,
here.
do.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right,
do.
okay.
Thank you.
Because I'm practically off the chair now. I've read a lot about all this, and there were some examples you gave that I found very interesting of where the lyric really demanded a certain change in the composition. And I think.
Well, one of them, one with one hand, one heart, you know, was the tune from Candide had dotted half notes. And so it's dum, 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 dum. And I said, I need some quarter notes in there. I can't write only words of one syllable, which you have to do. You can't go Susan, Lacy. It's got to be, one hand, one heart. And so he gave me some quarter notes. So it was make of our hand, etc. That was one instance where Lenny quite often wrote music that was very hard to set lyrically. Somewhere is an example. That's a tune he had in his trunk, and he'd tried apparently to shove that into every show from On the Town on, and got no takers. But I was the new kid on the block, so I had to set it. And Jerry wanted his ballet explained. And I thought there was no reason whatsoever to explain this ballet, but Jerry wanted it explained. So we came up with this notion of having this offstage voice. Actually, it was in the pit. And Lenny had this tune. And when you think about dum, 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 da, dum, it's very hard to set because you have to use one-syllable words. And I hated the fact that I couldn't solve there's a place for us. Bert Shevloff used to refer to it as the song. There's a place for it. It's exactly where you don't put the emphasis is on the least important word in the sentence. You don't put that on the high note. But I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. The tune was written. And come to think of it, that's the other tune I guess I just had to set because he'd written it already. That lyric still embarrasses me because the way it rises on the single, on the article. So he was very flexible, however, not with that tune, but I think he'd been living with it too long. But he was very flexible. As I say, the collaboration was easy. And I'm trying to think of other examples for you. If you have any, tell me. You said
that one I had made.
One hand, one heart. Somewhere.
What do you mean when you say that that the words must sit on the music?
Well, because if you're going to write conversational lyrics, which is what I like to do, and you write conversational lyrics for conversational musicals, which is what the kind of show I'm interested in generally. Just the way I'm talking right now, the sentence I'm speaking right now has inflections. You can hear, if you listen, the music of what I'm saying. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the music of what I'm saying. And in order for a lyric to, I think, to seem natural, you have to take the musical inflections into account and vice versa. And thus, if you're going to say there's a place for us, you don't say there's a place for us. You say there's a place for us. And even if you do it slow, it's there's a place for us. I would have the a shorter note than place because I don't want the to have the equal weight. Not to mention the fact that it would be high. I'd keep it low, and that's what I mean by sitting. It's got to sound. I mean, I think I shouldn't say all good art seems effortless. That's not true, but a lot of good art seems effortless. You don't want the listener shouldn't sweat. It's the writer who should sweat. And so that if you're sitting in the theater and listening to a song, and remember that unlike poetry, a lyric is the time spent in assimilating a lyric is dictated by the music. Whereas if you read a poem, you can read at your own speed. So in the theater, the listener has only one chance to understand what's going on. And therefore, and I believe that everything is subordinate to clarity. Clarity of thought, clarity of intention, clarity of diction. And so the periodicity of the music has to be taken into account. if a phrase ends, then there should be an implicit comma or period before going on to the next line. Run-on lines are very difficult for the ear to take in unless they're fast. And so it's all about making the thought clear to the listener, who only gets one chance at it. Not when he's playing a record, but otherwise. And music is so rich, and also on the stage there's so much else going on. The lyrics have to be underwritten, but they must sit on the music so that it's easy for the listener to hear them.
Are there any examples? I think I read about one from America, where you, where I guess the real question is...
Lenny came back from Puerto Rico, and he was just so excited about huapango, so he decided he would write a huapango. Yes, it's that lyric is pretty embarrassing. There's a phrase for a small fee in America, and it's yatta da 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 for a small fee. You just can't say it. It's no matter how good the singer is, it's just terrible. You can't say for a small fee. It doesn't sit, and the L and the F. I mean, it's just terrible. It's just terrible. But with a lyric like that, which has such short phrases, and I decided for good or ill, and I think probably for good, to have quadruple rhymes throughout. And once I locked myself into that, it became pretty hard, because you got to tell a joke in 4 very short rhymed lines. And they're also, if I'd known in advance how much movement there was going to be and all that sort of thing, I would have said, oh, the hell with it. I mean, there's so much going on stage. Nobody's listening to the lyric anyway. They only listen to the verses. They only listen to the Marilyn Cooper, Cheetah Rivera section, not when all the girls are singing. They listen, when Marilyn Cooper, that character, Rosalita, I think, she would feed the feed line, and then Cheetah Rivera would have the punch line. And those the audience could listen to. But when it came to yada da 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 da, nobody's listening anywhere. The only word they hear is America, and I sweated for no reason at all, and I didn't do a very good job. But
I'm really astounded that you say that, because I mean
those lines
I
don't get laughs.
Particularly
Those lines don't get.
And I think that to me it makes the piece.
I think if the lyric makes the piece for you, it's the exchanges between the two girls, not when the entire gang of girls is singing, because you can't understand what they're saying. So what made the number for you was the dancing and the music, and then the jokes in between, but not the I want to be in America. That's not what the audience was listening to.
Okay, by me in America.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Wait.
See?
No. I actually really do know them, but because I've probably listened to West Side Story, hundreds of times. So.
No.
I actually do know them, and I love them, and I think they're biting, and I think they're incredibly clever, and
Well,
I think you're very hard on yourself.
I may be hard on myself, but the fact is you don't remember them, and it's because
That's
they're not
true.
they're not
embarrassed to do
that's
it
right.
right
No, they're not distinguishable. They're very hard to understand. Look, you wanted an example of how difficult it is sometimes for a lyric to be heard or understood, and I gave you one. I mean, there are lines like "I want to be in America" is okay by me in America. Those sing fine. But some of them don't sing. And it's the punchlines that don't sing sometimes, and that's really bad. That's really bad, because you're heading for a joke, and then the ear can't take the joke in. That's all right.
It's not small fee, but there is one line that I never catch. And I have to...
Wall-to-wall floors.
That's it.
On paper, that's a really good joke, wall-to-wall floors. With the lips and the teeth and the tongue, forget it. Nobody gets it. And again, it's interesting because it's the LF problem, wall-to-wall floors. It's going from the L sound in wall to the FL sound in floors, and it's similar to for a small fee. It's an LF thing. It's very hard to get your tongue from an L shape to an F shape that fast. On paper, that's a really good sharp line, and sung, it's dreadful. For one good reason, you can't understand it.
You had to, I imagine, I know this to be the case, adapt yourself often to Lenny's music against sometimes what you really wanted to do. I mean, he's much more purple.
It's not the music. No. His idea of poetic lyrics was not my idea of poetic lyrics. And my idea of poetic lyrics is, oh, what a beautiful morning, oh, what a beautiful day. It's what happens when the lyric and the music come together. Lenny liked poesy, I think, or purple prose, and kept pushing me to do that. And there's some of it left in it because I was 25 years old and I was moderately in awe and also wanted to do a good job and please everybody. And Lenny was forceful, and over a period of time, I got my own strength, and by the time we were finishing the collaboration, I was able to write what I liked, which is, Something's Coming is the last song we wrote, and it shows, that's a really good lyric. But the whole thing of the purpleness of the prose or the lyrics is something I won't say we fought over, but it was an area of disagreement. He always wanted it to be fancier, and I always wanted it to be simpler.
That's interesting because he prided himself in, he says one of the things he learned from Copeland was plainness.
Not in language, and not when we worked together anyway.
And we actually talked about it in terms of plainness of language.
Yeah.
He said, and you'll see that I don't use unnecessarily complicated words. And of course he does all the time.
Well, it's not about complicated words. It's about pretentiousness. He wrote a lyric to the second part of A Boy Like That, I Have a Love, that went, once in your life, only once in your life, comes a flash of fire and light, and there stands your love, the harvest of your years. Now, this is sung by a street girl. I mean, a girl, a Puerto Rican girl. I mean, what are we talking about here? How do you explain to somebody? The only way I could explain it is to write my own lyric. But, again, I Have a Love is not my favorite lyric, to put it mildly, but at least it's simple. At least it's simple. You can believe, perhaps, that a girl, that character the Maria could sing something like that. But I can't believe that anybody could sing The Harvest of Years except in a bad opera translation,
I have a love and it's all that I have.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're simple words. No, I didn't know that Lenny said that about plainness, although he certainly was, he was so interested in communication that, that makes sense that he would pay lip service to that, but not in the writing.
What?
One of his favorite lines that I wrote was, "Today the world was just an address," which is a line I could barely put on paper because I thought, really? This boy is going to really sing that? A boy like Tony is going to sing that? But he was so enthusiastic, I left it in.
Well, there are very few places where I think that it sort of stands out. I know one of the lyrics you really don't like, which I'd like you to talk about, is "I Feel Pretty." I happen to love them. I mean,
I feel pretty.
How charming
It's fine. It just doesn't belong in the mouth of that character. That's all. Oh no, it's just that it's against the character. What happened was, I've said this before, but I'll say it again for your purposes, is that I'd spent so much time writing lyrics like "I Have a Love," and where I never got a chance to show off. And I was 25 years old. I wanted to show off, and so I wanted to do something with some inner rhymes and some grace and some elegance, and I did it, and it just doesn't belong in the mouth of that character. It's not deeply embarrassing, but that whole scene is pretty coy, and that lyric doesn't help. It does not help. That scene is. I had a lot of trouble looking at the stage during that scene. It's awfully twee, and I would have preferred I wrote a whole other lyric, as a matter of fact, in Washington, and nobody would accept it. I'd say, "Oh, it's working. Don't it?" Jerry's. He didn't say if it's not broke, don't fix it, but that's what he meant.
What were some of the other special language problems?
Language problems?
Yeah.
Well, they were pretty well solved by Arthur. The problem Arthur put his finger on right away, and it's one of the reasons the book is so good, is that any kind of street slang he would use would be out of date by the time the show got on, because the language changes so quickly, particularly in urban society. And so he made up his own language. And I think the only word that really is, and he picked it from the jazz world, was cool, which, has maintained its meaning throughout. But, things like fracas-de-track, which it sounds terrible when you say it, but it is, because it's so peculiar and bizarre, it's not dated. The language in West Side Story is very formalized. The book is very short and very concise. It's a very masterful. That's a very complicated plot, and the amount of time that Arthur had to tell the story is so tiny, and what he was able to do was make up a language. And on paper, I remember when I first looked at it, I thought, gee, this is pretentious stuff. People saying saying things like that, all these made-up words. And then I realized what he was doing, which is making. I'm reminded of the fact that when I went out to see Satyagraha, the Philip Glass opera, when I heard that it was in Sanskrit, I was making jokes about it. Can you imagine? It was a great idea because it's an open language, and you didn't understand one word, so that made sense. Because one of the things about hearing something in French or Italian is you may know a smattering of the language, so your ear gets caught by one word, and then you get distracted. But if you don't understand it at all, it maintains its freshness. That's what Arthur did. He wrote Sanskrit, and of course there are plenty of sentences with recognizable language. But when the gang was using street talk, jive talk, so to speak, and jive in the old sense, Arthur made it up, and so. I tried to do some of that. Lenny and I wrote a very long, well, I should say, the prologue, as you may or may not know, was all set lyrically. And I used a lot of Arthur kind of made-up language. And on paper it looks very self-conscious. But it sang very well because it was like these people had come from Mars, and you weren't asked to understand exactly what they were saying, but only the tone of what they were saying. Whereas if I'd used any words of, and if Arthur had used any words that were current street lingo at the time, it would be like 23 Skidoo today. It would date it instead of being, what is that? So that was the language stuff. I figured, and I think rightly, that if I could just keep all the language very simple, then it wouldn't date.
Can you give me an example from the prologue of something, a lyric?
Boy, I don't remember it. I remember the gang sitting around in their clubhouse, and they're taking an imaginary trip to the moon, and they refer to, I'm embarrassed to say, they refer to the moon as the Moon-a-Rooney. And it sounded like kids, but it didn't sound like something you'd heard before. And that's one example I'm thinking. I don't remember. I'd have to sit here for a while and think of that lyric.
Well, maybe it'll come to you. My notes here. What do you mean when you talk about bloodless lyrics?
They're lyrics that I think are essentially have no passion to them. They're written. They sound like a writer at work. One hand, one heart. I have a love. They don't sound like people. They sound like a writer is putting words down there. That's all. It's the same thing as with any bloodless writing or bloodless art at all. It's the absence of passion and the absence of feeling, whereas it can be perfectly respectable. There's even the lyrics I don't like in West Side, and there are a lot of them, are respectable lyrics. They're nothing to be ashamed of. I just don't think they're very good, but they're nothing to be ashamed of. And it was very hard to set a tune like Somewhere, I Have a Love, One Hand, One Heart. They're very formal tunes. They're really instrumentals. They're really not songs. I don't think Lenny was primarily a songwriter. I think he was a composer of instrumental music, and ballet music particularly was his forte as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think his songs really are songs. And I got to know that while I was working with him. I thought, I can't make these things sing. They should be played in the pit. And that's not true of all of them, but it's true of the love songs. And even Tonight feels to me like an instrumental. It doesn't feel like a song. Whereas the faster numbers, the opening, the Jet song and Something's Coming, Krupke, they feel like songs. Even Cool feels like a song, but the others feel very formal to me. So Arthur was describing what we had done, and what Arthur was actually doing was trying, those Sunday puff pieces were to prepare the audience and the critics for what they were going to see. And particularly in those days when all the critics came on one night, and all of them had 45 minutes to write their stories. So it was very important every Sunday that there be a piece about the shows that were coming up, were usually written by the authors, sometimes by an actor or an actress, to tell the critics what to expect. So that's why Arthur did that. He wanted to say, this is not an ordinary music. He wanted to warn people like that guy who left during the prologue what he was in for, and so he was describing it. But believe me, I wouldn't have walked out of the room. But I mean, I would have screamed with laughter if anybody said, "Let's, what we got to do is change the face of the American theater." Lenny didn't say that.
I'm glad, actually, that's
No,
okay.
he said it afterwards. He said it afterwards. Believe me, he wouldn't have said it if the show had been a flop.
One of the things that people talk about, and I know this is kind of hard sometimes to describe, but was that, well, the fact that there was so little. I mean, it really is a tribute to the genius of the book that there's so little dialogue.
Absolutely.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, Arthur had the job of having to tell this extremely melodramatic story. There's every scene has either a murder or a gang fight or a tempestuous romance. I mean, things happen. It's a very melodramatic story, and he had no time to do it because I don't know what the percentage would be, but let's say that with the usual musicals, 50% of it were songs and 50% were book scenes. With West Side, it's 70% are songs and dances and choreography, and 30% book. And yet, the plot of West Side Story is a much more dense plot than any musical I can think of, at least up to that time. And so he had the double whammy of having to tell a much more complicated story than usual, and in a much shorter time. And that book is a miracle of conciseness. And it's one of the things that gives the show its muscle. There's the motor energy of the dance music and the motor energy of the way that story's told. And that's what keeps that show from ever getting dull. Pretentious it gets, but it doesn't get dull. And it's because of those the combined elements of the pulse of the music, not the songs, but the pulse of the dance music, and the pulse of the book.
Do you think that's what keeps it?
Absolutely, it's what keeps it fresh. Yeah, I think it'll always be entertaining. I really believe that narrative drive is important to me. Not all musicals. I love to experiment with musicals that don't have narrative drive. I love trying to see other ways of doing it. But when you have narrative drive, one of the things about Sweeney Todd is the narrative drive. It's what's going to happen next. Well, West Side, what's going to happen next? Even if you know the story, what's going to happen next? And it's interesting. Arthur improved on the book. Last night we went to see R&J, which I highly recommend. It's really interesting. And you know what it is. It's four guys doing Romeo and Juliet, but there's a reason that these four guys are doing it. It's very interesting. And it gets much less interesting in the second half, and that's because Shakespeare's play is much less interesting in the second half. Arthur did he took the whole last two acts of Romeo and Juliet and put them in about 3 minutes, because that's all they're worth in terms of storytelling. If you don't have the poetry, then nothing is happening. Once they go to Friar Lawrence's and all that stuff about the poison, that's another thing that Arthur did brilliantly. How do you substitute for the gimmick that Shakespeare, he must have thought it up overnight. He thought, oh God, how am I going to kill them off? I know. It'll be a poison that makes somebody appear dead, but then the messenger will get interrupted on the road because there'll be a plague, and then they won't get the message in time. It's all nonsense. And what Arthur did was root it in character by having Anita come to deliver the message and having the gang rape her, so that it is the prejudice itself that causes the message not to be delivered. And that's good playwriting. But easy to say now, hard to think up when you come to it. Very hard. Lenny and I, we were writing a song that was going to be a fake suicide. Maria was going to leave her shoes by the East River so that people think she drowned herself, and blah, blah. With all kinds of melodramatic happenings. And Arthur came up with this, which is much more integral. And it's an exciting dance moment, too, when they start raping Anita.
Do you think that West Side Story is a tragedy? I mean, I asked that in the in the classical sense?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to define tragedy for me before I could. I mean, uh, um, gosh, there's some wonderful aphoristic definitions of tragedy and comedy. Um, uh, it's got an unhappy ending. That's all I can say. I think words like tragedy and comedy, perhaps. I mean, people associate comedy with laughs, and that's not necessarily true. And they associate tragedy with deaths, and that's not necessarily true. You know, so I think I don't believe in labels anyway. It's a musical with an unhappy ending.
Let's talk about the casting. I know I've read that you were incredibly instrumental in the casting.
Only about Larry Kurt, who played Tony. That was. I don't know where you would have read that, but I'd seen Larry Kurt at Camp Tournament, which was one of those summer resorts where they put on a different show every weekend, and Mary Rogers was working there, and she was a good friend, and I went up to see a couple of shows and saw this really talented guy. And when we were looking for Tony, Lenny wanted desperately to have a tenor who could get up to a high C, so we saw a lot of overweight 40-year-olds coming to audition for an 18-year-old boy, and it was very hard to dissuade him, very hard. And but he was outvoted, and so we wanted somebody who could sing, but wasn't necessarily somebody to get up to a high C. He'd written a high C in the obligato of Maria. And when Larry Kurt came into audition, as a matter of fact, and he was my suggestion, he could only hit an F. He couldn't get up. He was really a lyric baritone. He wasn't a tenor. And by the time he got finished in the run, he had stretched his voice up to an A. Got up to an A. But that was my major suggestion for the casting. The other casting thing I remember was Carol Lawrence, who played Maria, had auditioned a number of times, and the best we thought she could do would be perhaps as a standby for Maria, and we couldn't find a Maria. And finally one day she came in for like the third audition, and Arthur said to Jerry, have her read it with a Puerto Rican accent. And the minute she read it with an accent, she became Maria. And it was really interesting. Same actress, same performance, but with an accent, she was Maria. And nobody had ever thought to ask her to read with an accent.
Several people have talked about the difficulties in casting because of the need to have people who could sing, could dance, and do all those things. So I'm not going to ask you to tell that story, but it wasn't finally one of the strengths that the dancing actually drove the casting, and so that the singers really did sound like kids in the street. I mean, it wasn't like this professional voices.
No, they were musical comedy people. They'd all been in musicals. No, it wasn't like we took kids off the street. These were trained. There were a couple of ballet dancers, people who I think had not been on Broadway stage before, but had been in ballet. But Carol, I'd seen Carol Lawrence do musicals, and Larry had done music. I mean, they were musical comedy people. And by musical comedy, I mean musical theater, but in those days, there weren't such pretentious terms as musical theater, but just people had been in musicals.
The rehearsal process, you were quite involved in all of that.
Well, not as much as I would like to have been, because Jerry was very, very, very touchy about anybody seeing him work. That included Lenny and Arthur. And I remember the first day, I was so excited, the first rehearsal of my first show, and I bounded up the stairs into the rehearsal hall, and Jerry stopped what he was doing, came over and said, I'd like you to leave. And I was crushed. And he said, I can't work with anybody else in the room. He, over a period of years, when he gradually let down his guard a bit, and when he was working on, we called him in to help with a funny thing happened the way to the Forum in Washington, and I said, don't worry, I won't come. He said, you can come in, it's okay. By that time, that was 4 years later, he had relented. But on West Side, he didn't even want Lenny around, and Lenny wasn't around. He did all his stuff with Betty Wahlberg.
I hadn't realized that.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I say all, that's my memory. You can check with Jerry.
Sounds like it was a pretty tough rehearsal process.
Well, what? No, it wasn't. I remember every time Jerry would show us anything, I just melted. I just thought what he did was just dazzling, and I was also excited because it was my first show. No, the rehearsal process. Jerry is tough to work with. He's very hard to work with, and I just soon not get into that. And that is true. That is true. But I don't think that belongs on a show about Lenny. I mean, I could tell.
If one person has said it, at least 50
no, I
people
can.
have said there are only two things
I can tell.
Lenny was afraid of: Jerry Robbins and God.
Yeah. No, I can tell you. Yes, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you an anecdote. Jerry took over the orchestration in Washington of somewhere. He had said to Lenny that he wanted a specific kind of sound, and Lenny did his own kind of sound. And Jerry, during the orchestra reading, was in the pit, and the cast was on stage. Jerry got up from his seat, walked down the aisle, and in front of the cast and the orchestra, and Lenny, who was sitting next to me, said to the conductor, all right, circle those instruments, meaning take those instruments out. Now, I want something, and he started to reorchestrate in front of Lenny. And I thought, oh, boy, is there going to be a fight now? I couldn't wait because then I could get on the phone and call my friends in New York and say, well, you should have said the fight down. Not at all. I looked, and the seat was suddenly empty next to me. And Lenny was nowhere to be found. And I thought, well, so I went to the front of the theater, the front of the house, the lobby, and he wasn't there. And I had an instinct. And I went out on the street, and I looked for the nearest bar. And there was one down the block, about a block away. And I went there, and Lenny was there with 3 scotches lined up in front of him, shots. Rather than confront Jerry, and it was his music that Jerry was screwing around with. And rather than confront him, he went off to the bar. Jerry's a fearsome fellow. A fearsome fellow.
When you found him there in the bar, did you ask him why he wasn't?
No, I didn't know. Gosh, no.
Just put your arm around him.
I don't. I probably just. I asked for a scotch. I don't know about it. I don't. Yeah. Yes. I could. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. I was embarrassed for him and angry for him. But it wasn't up to certainly, we did not talk about it. We did not talk about it.
I'm curious about this. Do you think that Lenny thought that maybe Jerry was right, and that caused some?
No. Jerry wanted a sound for his dance, and Lenny wanted a sound for his music. And Lenny was right in terms of what Lenny wanted, and Jerry was right in terms of what Jerry wanted. They wanted different things, so neither was right or wrong. It was the sort of it was the chutzpah of taking over an orchestra in front of the guy. That's just not good. I mean, he could have had it out with Lenny later and said, I want that changed, and gotten it changed, but he wouldn't do it. He had to do it right there.
If you had to describe, and I know that pat descriptions are not your thing, but if you had to say what was original or unique about the music in a couple of sentences, what would you say?
I couldn't. I mean, it's original because it's Lenny, and it's original with Lenny. It's his style of writing. Unique. That's the kind of question you can't answer about anything. I mean, what makes Beethoven's music unique or original? What makes Kern or Arlen?
That's a different way. How would you describe the qualities of the music?
Oh, the music in West Side, the music I like anyway, is the music that has real kinetic energy. It's got drive and rhythm and theatrical color. I think Lenny's great strength as a theater writer was knowing how music functions. As I said earlier, I don't think he was a songwriter, but he sure knew when music should come in and how it should color a scene, underscoring. He was wonderful at that, and dance and that sort of thing. He had a real sense of, which is absolutely innate, and I think you can't teach it, of how music operates in a theater. And it's a very specific kind of talent. And I know some composers who are really good composers who do not have that sense. They write very good songs, but they don't have the sense of how music is used in the theater the way Lenny did.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
It's hard because you have to give specific examples, And West Side is so filled with exciting music and for the dances that I don't know how one would describe moments. I'm better at describing how moments work in songs, but in dance music you'd have to play the piece and look at what was happening on the stage and see how that works, see how that change of color works. Because that was another thing about Lenny, is very few composers orchestrate their own music in the theater because there isn't time. And in fact, as you know, on West Side, Sid Raymond and Irv Kostal did it, but Lenny supervised it, and Lenny's sense of color and what an orchestra can do is very important, again, to the theatricality of the piece. West Side's a very theatrical piece. As I said, it's about the theater. And it seems to me the great strength of the music, apart from its innate excitement, is how it serves the melodrama of what's going on, you know?
Conveying the meaning
Right.
of the story.
And you have to give some of that credit to Jerry, because Jerry, one of the reasons I think Jerry and Lenny worked so well together is that Lenny smelled what Jerry wanted, and Jerry knew how to articulate, even though he wasn't saying, I want an F sharp there, but he knew how to convey to Lenny what he wanted. And it's hard for me to think of the dances in West Side as having any music other than Jerry's. It's one of the problems they had with On the Town, with this last revival, is, you know, they were dissatisfied with the choreography. Well, of course they were, because Lenny wrote that music for Jerry's choreography. And you can't then just put other choreography on top of the music for On the Town. You have to use Jerry's choreography, because they were written like collaborators, like words and music. And that's one of the triumphs of West Side Story, is the dances and the music go together. And they're inseparable.
Let's talk about a little bit the response. There's this legend that's, you know, because it's become such a legend in the theater, that it immediately was this huge success.
Oh, no.
But it wasn't.
Not at all. No, it had a respectable run, and for the last 6 months of its... it closed in New York, went out on the road, and then came back to New York for another 6 months. And the last 6 months of New York run were on twofers. That is, say, two tickets for the price of one. It was never a big hit. It made its money back, mostly, I think, because the cast was young and inexperienced and got small salaries. So the running cost was not very great. And it was extremely well produced. You know, Hal Prince and Bobby Griffith knew how to produce a show. And produce it economically. So it caused much too much discomfort with a lot of audience, like that guy on the second night who left after the first couple of minutes. It was not what people wanted to see particularly. The songs were never recorded, or rarely. I think there were, I believe, only two so-called popular artists, Johnny Mathis and Dinah Shore, each did a song from West Side. But the songs, nobody knew the songs until the movie came out. The movie is what made the score popular, and because they played it over and over and over again, the disc jockeys, and because United Artists, you know, had spent a lot of money on the movie, and they wanted to plug the score, and they did. And as with all music, if you hear it enough times, you can hum it. But when West Side came out, even the critics that liked the show said, unfortunately, you can't hum it. But gee, the dance music is exciting, but you can't hum any of the songs. And it's nonsense, of course. And but it did happen, and that score was not really heard by the public for 4 years until the movie came out, and then it was heard every place.
So much for critics.
Yeah, well, exactly. 10 ears they have, and also, it's you know, taking in music of that kind of complexity on one hearing, it's hard to do. You know. Usually, if you can hum a song on one hearing, you've heard it before. You know, it's usually like another song, and particularly like the songs in West Side. But it got mixed reception. It got generally favorable notices. It didn't win the Tony Award. It was not well thought of.
What did?
Music Man.
That would actually be a very wonderful statement if you could just say what was the climate on Broadway that West Side Story was competing with?
Well, it's not that West Side Story was competing with anything on Broadway. It was because I think, of its subject matter, and the fact that it did end unhappily, and that it had its own pretensions. it was not welcomed by the so-called Broadway community or by the public very much. It was tolerated, and for people with ears and eyes, it was exciting. So there were many people who were excited by it, but it was not a big hit for that reason. Whereas The Music Man, which ran in the same season and won the Tony Award, West Side Story did not, and the Critics' Circle Award, West Side Story did not. It was a much more popular show, and The Music Man had a lot of experimental aspects to it, but it was what Lillian Hellman used to call she used to call certain plays pleasant people with pleasant problems. Populated certain play. Music Man is about pleasant people with pleasant problems, and that's what people wanted to see in the theater, and still do. Still do.
Lenny described the collaboration with you as an incredible joy.
You know, we had a great time.
And that you were really like an alter ego to him. And mainly because you're also a composer.
Yeah, because I was a musician. That's part of it. And also we shared things like crossword puzzles and anagrams. I mean, so it was really, we were having a good time apart from writing and getting to know each other.
I would say, though, from what little I know of you, though I am one of your biggest fans, and I really mean that, and what I've got to know about Lenny, that temperamentally you were about as different as you could be. Would you say that?
Yes, we were temperamentally different. I was very, and still am, I'm quite recessive. I'm not particularly outgoing or gregarious, and Lenny was nothing but, as you know. I mean, he loved being around people and talking and being flamboyant, and my tendency was to sit in the corner and just watch. I'm less that way now, but never a patch on Lenny, who was, gregarious to a fault. I mean, he was out there all the time. When we were working together, he had the same kind of exuberance, although it was quite often contained if he was thinking, but open enthusiasm was very much a part of every day we worked together. And that's good, because I tend, when I work, I love collaborating, but I tend to see the black side of things. I tend to see the dangers in writing the song or the scene. We got to be careful not to do that. I want to be careful not to do that. Lenny taught me one wonderful lesson. He didn't put it this way, but it was, and I'm not even sure he articulated it, but he did it certainly by example, which is, if you're going to fail, if you're going to fall off the ladder, fall off a high rung. He was always taking chances. And so that's why his failures are huge and deeply embarrassing, because they're huge. And there's nothing niggly and nothing petty about anything that Lenny wrote. He always out there, wham. And when it works, it's thrilling. And when it doesn't work, you want to hide under the chair. But that's an important thing to do. I think it's very important to always fall off the high rung. I've been trying to do that. When I've fallen, I hope they've been huge falls.
You haven't had too many of those.
I've had a few.
What do you think is what's your personal favorites of Lenny's composition?
The Serenade, the first three movements of the Serenade, my favorite of his, and I like a lot of his ballet music. And I mean, I love Fancy Free, and I like the Dybbuk variations. He didn't like the Age of Anxiety, but I do. That symphony. But the Serenade is the one I will always go for. The first three movements, particularly the opening bars of that, are as beautiful as anything I've ever heard in my life. It's thrilling.
How do you feel about Jeremiah?
I don't know it well. I've never cottoned to it. It and Facsimile are the two that I've never quite cottoned to. It's not that I dislike them. I don't relate to them the way I do the other symphonic pieces of his.
Did he ever talk to you about his response to his failures?
No, he didn't. I'm not sure he ever acknowledged them. Did he? Okay. Well, he didn't to me. Like what failure did he acknowledge?
Mass.
He didn't to me. When I went down to see Mass at his invitation, I said something, and it sounds, in retrospect, bitchy, but it was not meant. After it was all over, I said, I wish the whole thing had been in Latin. I was not so much criticizing the lyrics. What I was saying is, I wish it weren't specific. I wish you wouldn't tell me what to think. I wish it weren't preachy. I wish it were just music. And I think it would have been a much better piece. But you know, Lenny had these ambitions. I know Steve Schwartz wrote a lot of this stuff, but he had this ambition to be a poet, and he wasn't. And the more he tried, the more embarrassing it got. And where he was a poet was in his music, and in his teaching, and indeed in his life. But not when it came to writing it down. Although I like some of the lyrics in Trouble in Tahiti. I think the movie song Trouble in Tahiti is terrific, and I like some of the husband and wife stuff and some of the trio stuff. So it's not that he couldn't write lyrics, but he tended to preach at you and to make big statements and tell you, this is an important work. That's when a work isn't important.
Explain that dichotomy. He was in fact an extraordinarily sophisticated man, and yet I feel that, and even his children say it, that this need to preach, this need for everything to be terribly important, is really very naive. How do you explain it?
I can't explain it. He just wanted to be important. He wanted to be the Renaissance man, you know. And I don't know why people want to be important. Some do, some don't. But he did. I have no explanation of it. I don't know enough about his childhood. I'm sure it can be psychoanalyzed down to a dime, you know. But he wanted every work to be important. He wanted people to think it was important. See, I wish I could say he wanted it to be important. I think he wanted people to think it was important, and that's a trap. That's a trap.
He was insecure?
Sure. What writer isn't? Why do you think people write? Of course he was insecure. He was very secure in aspects of his art, like conducting. He was very secure. He was not secure as a writer. I was 25 years old, and he would, when I would come into work, he would, if he had an idea for tune, he'd say, now, look, I know this is Brahms. I know it's all Steve, I know that, but it's an idea. He would make excuses to me before he played. There was nobody else in the room. When Arthur got so impatient that Arthur would come in and to hear a new song, and Lenny would say, now, Arthur would say, spiel, Lenny, spiel, meaning play. Just spiel. Arthur, look, now, you know, I know it, spiel, Lenny. He didn't want to sit around for 5 minutes of excuses. Now, you know, I was astonished to find that kind of behavior on Lenny's part, you know, that he was insecure in front of me about playing something when we were working together. God, I was nervous enough giving him a lyric, but, you know, I had no track record. I encountered the same thing when I worked with Richard Rodgers. I couldn't believe it. Not with Julie Stein. Julie Stein never doubted himself. Richard Rodgers constantly would excuse what he was going to play me. Didn't make any sense to me. I'd do it, but I can't believe that they would do it, you know. So in that sense, he was very insecure, I think. But I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy, too. I think it's healthy not to be smug about what you're writing. But he did try to put a price tag on everyone, and it had to be a big price tag. This is a $10 million piece of music.
How would you describe your personal relationship?
Well, Lenny was, as I'm sure other people have told you, was wonderful one-on-one. But when there were other people around, he became Leonard Bernstein in his own mind with a capital L and a capital B. And it was less fun. But he was terrific one-on-one. And towards in the last decade of his life, I would only see him maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and always I insisted he had to come to my house for dinner. I had to go to his house for dinner because I had to be one-on-one, because I really couldn't deal with the ego inflation that would happen when other people were around, and it caused a couple of unpleasant moments that we had occasionally. Wanted just dinner with him and Felicia and me, and it was not good. It was not good.
Why do you think that happened? I mean, why do you think he began to buy all the press?
Why he began to buy his own myth? I don't know. Why do people do that? As I say, I think it meant so much to him to be thought of as important. And I can't tell you why he did that, but that's why I think, you know. He tried. I think he tried to think of himself in the third person, you know. He never used the third person, but I once said to him, he got very angry. I said, "Why does almost every sentence out of your mouth begin with the word I?" And he got really angry. He left the room. This was the dinner I had with him and Felicia, and he left the dining table and went out of the building, walked around the block, and came back. I said to Felicia, he said, she just said, "Steve, you can't." And I wasn't saying, I was saying it. I was saying it, I think, out of probably a built-up resentment of that kind of egoism. And whatever had been going on at dinner was just too much Lenny and not enough about the three of us or whatever. Who knows? And so I'm suspicious of my own motives for saying it, but I had no idea it was going to cause such... I really meant it as a pinking him. It was not supposed to be a slap in the face, but he took it as a slap in the face.
No, I think you just touched a button.
Yeah, I touched a button, but I really, if I'd known I was going to have that consequence, I wouldn't have done it.
No, but truth. I think you hit on truth.
Yeah.
That
And yeah, no, I don't think anybody ever, maybe Felicia did, but I don't think anybody ever said to his face, "You're egoistic, and you're making things up." He had this fantasy Leonard Bernstein in his mind, and some of it was real, because he was so highly thought of, and so accomplished, and so talented. So there were grounds for believing it, but not enough.
What do you think his most important legacy is? Again, that's one of those questions.
Oh gosh, I think some of the music is a legacy, and certainly what he did in educational terms. I think those young people concerts, broadcasts should be shown every year. I just think they're thrilling. He was a great teacher, and he clearly loved it. And art is a form of teaching anyway, and so he was able to do it in so many ways. I don't know enough about conducting to know what kind of a legacy that is. I really don't know what makes a great conductor, a good conductor, a poor conductor, or a consistent conductor. But certainly some of the ballet music and some of the symphonic music, I think, will give pleasure 100 years hence. And the teaching was just great.
Can we just talk a moment about exception in the rule? Not a lot.
Sure.
But I interviewed John Ware, and he talks about it very interestingly, and I'm going to ask Jerry about it.
You'll find this is Rashomon. We all remember it differently, I think.
What's your version?
The exception in the rule, Jerry wanted me to do a piece by Brecht called The Measures Taken. And I tried, and I couldn't make it work. No, as a matter of fact, that's not true. Yeah, no. Measures Taken, I read it, and I didn't see how it could be a musical. And he said, well, what about the next one in the book, which is called The Exception in the Rule? It was a paperback of Brecht's plays. And so I read The Exception in the Rule. I tried to write a song for it. I think I wrote a song and a half, and I couldn't make it work. Brecht is not my man. And so I said to him, why don't you give it to Lenny? I think he could do lyrics, because he's done good lyrics in Trouble in Tahiti, and could write this for you. And it's the kind of thing I think would be right up his alley. He said, I don't think he could do the lyrics. I said, then I don't know what to suggest. Well, anyway, what they did was they got Jerry Lieber of Lieber and Stoller to write it. And he was writing it with Lenny, and Jerry Robbins called me and said, it's not working out, and I want you to go and hear. I don't think the songs are working out. So I went up to hear them, and Lenny played them, and I thought they were terrific. They'd written maybe half a dozen songs. I really thought, and they were right for the piece. So there it lay, and then I was at a party, and Jerry and Lenny were there, and they beckoned me off into a corner or into another room and said, it's not going to work out. Won't you please do the lyrics? And I said, no, I like composing, and I don't like Brecht, and I love working with the two of you, but. And Stuart Ostrow was going to produce it. When Stuart Ostrow took me to lunch, and he said, I want to tell you what the idea of the show is, which I may have the chronology wrong. The point is, I remember that lunch because Stu told me that John Guare was going to do a libretto, and John Guare had this notion about a television studio. And I thought it was a brilliant idea and really exciting. And in a moment of excited weakness, I said yes. So we started working on it. And after we'd written about 8 songs, I realized that all the fun of the show was in the Guare part, the television studio. And the central piece, because, it was about this this show being put on in a television studio, and there was the frame in the television studio was funny and fun, and the exception to the rule was still the exception and the rule. You know, this, for my money, Locke's play. And said to Lane, I can't go on. I cannot go on. I said, you can keep the songs, you can do anything you wish with them. They're yours, but I can't go on this way. Jerry had started to lose interest, too. And this all occurred at a dinner with the four of us, John and Jerry and me and Lenny. And Lenny was devastated because he put so much time and effort, and he didn't have that much time to write anyway because he was so busy doing other things. And he was really, really bothered by it. And but I couldn't in all good faith go on with it. I didn't think what we were doing was good, and I didn't think what I was doing was good, and I didn't think the project was going to be any fun except for what Guare was doing. And as you know, they tried to resuscitate the piece about, 6 years ago, something like that. And John wrote some lyrics, I know, and I told him he could use any of the songs they want. I still think the best songs were the ones that Jerry Lieber wrote with Lenny.
I think there's going to be some kind of version of it in the fall, or something that I've heard.
I will be in Connecticut.
About it. I keep wanting to get one little piece of music from it, but I don't think anything's been recorded.
But it's been recorded by Lenny and me.
It was?
I have a tape of it. Yeah, it's down a rehearsal.
Oh, could we borrow it?
I don't know. Let me hear it. I'll have to go listen to it.
I'm really hard.
No, because I really don't like it. I really don't like it. I really don't like it.
Well.
Also, this is when I say record. A little tape recorder was put on top of a piano, and we stop in the middle of numbers, and we're doing it down at Jerry's rehearsal studio on 19th Street, and Stuart was there, and it may have been for Stu. I don't remember why we actually taped it, but.
What would be quite fascinating. Did you tape other things together?
No, just that. No, we didn't do anything for West Side. When West Side was around, I don't think tape recorders were very common then. There were wire recorders. I don't remember a lot of tape machines going on.
I'd like to go back to the 50s when
so would I.
You were when you were going and spending time with Lenny and Felicia and the family in Martha's Vineyard and doing the home movies.
Oh,
and
great!
That sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, we used to make movies. I had a movie camera, 60 millimeter movie camera, and Lenny and Felicia and the family had made movies before, so I was fitting right into the tradition. But Felicia very wisely said, "I do not want to plan on spending a weekend making movies." She said, "If you come up here to visit," which I did. We did one in the Vineyard, and we did one in Rock. What do I do? Rock. I want to say Rock Meadow. That's Mary's house. But, at Fairfield, but I can't remember the name of the estate. What's it called? In fact, it's printed on stationery. Anyway, my memory's gone. Anyway, I would arrive at the Vineyard or up in Fairfield with my camera, and if on Friday night we felt like making a movie, and Felicia felt like it, then she said, then we'll make it. We'll plan it Friday night, and we'll shoot it Saturday. But that's it. No Sunday, just Saturday, because I do not want to spend my life planning movies. Obviously, she'd had some trouble in the past with the family, and Felicia had the first one we did. Actually, the first one we did didn't come out because I had a shutter problem on the camera, which I wasn't aware of. So when I got all the film back from the lab, the bottom third of it was black because there was a mirror that was supposed to swing away, and it didn't swing all the way. Right? So the first one we did, which it starred Lenny as it was a takeoff on Golden Boy, Odette's play, and a movie called Humoresque, in which John Garfield played a violinist who got involved with a rich neurotic lady. And Felicia played the rich neurotic lady, and Lenny was a concert trombonist and prize fighter. And he got involved, and he had his wife played by Afra Bikel, and this rich neurotic lady played by Felicia. The climax was when she, in Humoresque, Joan Crawford walks off into the ocean and commits suicide. And so in my version, I had Felicia going down the dock, and I just followed her feet and then a trail of her jewelry, because she always, even when she wore a bathing suit, she had dripping with jewels, and you just watched the jewelry being dropped off on the dock, and then the camera panned up and there was just water there. I mean, and it was that kind of thing, but it didn't come out because of the bottom third of the picture. But then the second time, Felicia said, all right, we'll make a movie. She said, I've always wanted to be an opera star, so let's do Tosca. So we did the last 10 minutes of the second act of Tosca, which was all done on the Saturday. Felicia did all the set decorations, which are brilliant. And she plays Tosca, and Lenny plays Scarpia, and I play his henchman coming up from behind the house. Now, I have no skill whatsoever in photography. So, there'd be a shot in blinding white light here, and then a shot from the side in complete darkness in the set, continuing the same scene, And I had, I recorded it on, it was optically recorded. It was in the camera. It was magnetic tape in the camera. It was not. And what I hadn't realized is, because it was a spring-wound camera, that even though Felicia and Lenny were lip-syncing to the callous recording, that when the film came out, when it came back from the lab, because the camera speed subtly slowed down as the spring unwound, that the lip-syncing would be fine for about a third of the shot, and then it was start by the end of the shot, it was way off. Lenny found there were 3 machines, one in Chicago, one in New York, and one in Germany, that could change the speed of a tape without affecting the pitch. It was a German machine. And it cost him about $600, but he took the tape, or the film rather, to this place, which was on 42nd Street. And we got, I'd say, about 80% of it lip sunk through utilizing this machine, which would speed up and slow it down, but without changing the pitch. And so,
I'm going to use a little piece in the film.
oh, are you? Oh, good,
Absolutely.
good. Yeah, well, it was great fun. Well, the great thing about it is Felicia did something so brilliant. She, instead of playing Tosca, she played a great diva playing Tosca. So the attitude is what makes it funny, And I had her at one point take us before she sings Visidarte. I had her take an atomizer and spray her throat. And I had one really nice zoom shot going into her tonsils. She hit Louis, the big high note, and she opens her mouth. I go right in and then come right back out. It's fun. It was fun. But we did that one day, and then we did another one in Fairfield, which was called Whatever Happened to Felicia Monte Alegre. It was a takeoff on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, with Phyllis Newman and Felicia playing rival sisters. And Lenny, the stranger who comes into their lives. I took from Tennessee Williams' play, from Orpheus Descending. He played sort of Marlon Brando with a guitar. They were great fun, and it was those summer weekends with the Bernsteins are among the best weekends I ever had, because when Lenny was relaxed and away from what we call the madding crowd, where he didn't have to be anybody but himself, he was fun. He's a great game player. He loved that. And he was enthusiastic about everything, and he's he was just exuberant. And up in Martha's Vineyard, there was no need to be a celebrity.
So it was a different Lenny. I mean, do you think in general, though, that over his life, I mean, by the time of the end of his life, he was a different Lenny than he was in the 50s?
I didn't know him that well. I mean, I really knew him best in the 50s and early 60s. And by the mid-60s, we saw each other less frequently, because our lives just, sort of separate, not for any particular reason. So I can't really, and when all the difficulties in his life happened, with Felicia and then the separation and Felicia's illness and all that sort of thing, I didn't see him very much. So, and certainly a series of events like that are going to change anybody. I have no idea how every time I would see him one-on-one, it was the old Lenny.
I can't remember if I asked you this or not. I think maybe we were just changing the tape. Did Lenny ever talk to you about his conflict between the Broadway, the theater, and the symphony hall?
No, never. No, I didn't even know that there was a conflict. The only thing I ever remember him saying is he wished he had more time to write, but I don't think it had to do with whether it was writing for Broadway or not. He wanted to be the master of all trades. So he wanted to have a musical. He wanted to be the most successful musical, as well as be the most successful conductor and write the most successful symphony, whatever it was. So I I was around when in Philadelphia when they were trying out 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and he was really not happy. He wasn't happy with Candide either. He invited me up to Boston to give my opinion. I was 26 years old. Give my opinion to Tyrone Guthrie, Lillian Hellman, and Richard Wilbur. I thought I was just going to go up because he wanted me to see the show, and suddenly there I was in a hotel room giving my opinion. It was awful.
Were they receptive?
I don't remember. I was so embarrassed and so shy. But I doubt if they were. And I'm sure they were thinking, "Oh God, look what Lenny is putting us through. He's getting this, young punk from New York to tell us how to fix our show." The original Candide, incidentally, I liked it a lot. The problem was that the book had nothing to do with the score, which had nothing to do with the direction. They were all coming from different... I liked Lillian Hellman's book very much, but it was truly black, whereas the score, which I think is Lenny's best score, is all bubble and fun and sparkle. And the direction was like an operetta. That's, Hal was able to pull all the forces together, Hal Prince, when he did the revival. But
you wrote some new lyrics.
I wrote some lyrics for it, yeah, at Hal's request.
So do you think that version is the most successful Candide?
Oh, yeah, I think it is the most successful. I find the original Candide more interesting because of the blackness of the book. But certainly the most successful is. Although I like the version I like best is the one that Hal did first, which was a 90-minute version. I think the trouble with Candide is because it's episodic, it just goes on too long. And when it's concise, the way it was in Hal's first version, as opposed to his second version, when it went to the New York City Opera and it was suddenly in 2 acts and all those songs came flooding back in again. It's not the songs aren't good, it's just it should be a concert evening if you're going to do all those songs. But it doesn't hold together as well. I think when it was tight in 90 minutes, it was terrific.
And you think that was his best score?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Almost every song in Candide, I love Richard Wilbur's lyrics. I think almost every song is there are some I like better than others, but it's always fresh. It's always a delight. I think it's, and it's interesting. Lenny would, when he would play me stuff from it, because he wanted me to do the lyrics. And what had happened, as you probably know about Candide, is a version had been written before West Side. We started writing West Side. And John Latouche had done lyrics. He had died. And the project died. And then it was resuscitated while we were writing West Side. And suddenly it all came to life again, and it was going to be produced by this woman, Ethelinda Reiner. And so Lenny said, would you do the lyrics? And I said, I really want to write music. So if we're going to take a 6-month hiatus from West Side, which is what we did, Arthur wrote a play called Clearing in the Woods, and Jerry directed Bells Are Ringing, and Lenny went off to do Candide. And I wanted to write music, and I started a musical, which never came to fruition. And also, I had to earn a living, so I wrote some scripts for a television series called The Last Word. And Lenny asked, and I suggested, I suggested, I think, Flanders and Swan. And because I thought, who writes that kind of crisp, satirical, well-rhymed lyric? And as you may or may not know, Flanders was crippled, and he couldn't travel to the United States easily because he was in a wheelchair. And so that didn't work out. And Lenny got Richard Wilbur, and it was an inspired choice. I don't know if it was Lenny's idea, but it was inspired because they're really, really wonderful lyrics, and just right for the show. But I didn't want to just do lyrics.
One last question. Tell me about the Helen Coates game.
Well, it's more than the Helen Coates game. For Lenny's 50th birthday, I guess it was. Yeah. I invented, he was about to take over, he'd taken over the Philharmonic. Let me just get this straight what the occasion was. It was, he was going to leave the Philharmonic, and there was much speculation as to who was going to replace him. So I invented a 4-part game, there's 4 games, called The Great Conductor Hunt. And the first part was a game in which it's actually quite a good game. It involves letters and moves and making words out of the letters by moving pieces according to well, I won't go into it, but the point was, you graduate from music school. And the second game was called, maybe I'll be sorry, maybe it was 3 games, wait a minute. Yeah, it was 3. The second game was called Itinerary. This is where you audition as a conductor for Lenny by following him all over the world. It's a sort of travel game, but the idea of the game was his attention span is very short, so you try to make the shortest possible program of pieces you can get, and then he listened to you, you see, and it was all done on cards with pieces like, if you do the Mahler eighth, it takes a day and a half. I mean, it's stuff like that. And so it was a game of trying to trap Lenny in a hotel room around the world and make him listen to you conduct. And the third game was a gigantic, 3-dimensional lucite maze that supposedly represented Philharmonic Hall, in which you try to corner Lenny and just find him there. And he is constantly loose, and you travel around and you keep running into Lenny's friends. It was all pieces in little passageways. It was a maze, in fact, of what it was, with the conductors put him in the middle. And now, in the first game, there were so-called penalty cards, and I thought, instead of having actual cards like you have in, or not necessarily penalty card, but you may pick a letter from your opponent, you have to give a letter to your opponent, that kind of thing. Chance cards that would happen every now and then by the throw of the dice. And I thought, instead of printing them out, like you do in Monopoly, I would have Helen Coates read them. Now, I don't know if your listeners know who Helen Coates is, okay? And so I got Helen Coates to read in her dry school teacher voice all these things. You may take a letter from your opponent. Lenny, and I made each one kind of personal, I think. I said, Lenny will such and such and such. You may take a letter from your left-hand opponent. Or Lenny will not do that, such and such. Or Lenny is too busy to see you. Whatever it was. I can't remember, because it wasn't about seeing Lenny. It was about graduating from school. But those cards were read by Helen Coates. So every time, so it was on, I put it on an acetate. And so every time the die would require a card to be turned up, you just put it onto the next groove and find out whether you got a letter or lost a letter. Helen, she was completely baffled, but all she knew was that it was a part of Lenny's 50th birthday present, and so as long as it was part of a present for him, that's all that mattered.
That is incredibly elaborate. How did they do that?
Months. Couple of months, but I would rather invent games and write puzzles and invent crossword puzzles than write any songs. I can tell you. Oh no, it took a lot, and the lucite maze was not cheap. I went downtown and got it made by a firm down there, but I spent a lot of time, because the problem with the maze is once you solve it, you know how to do it. So I worked it out so that every game was different by putting little blocked pieces in various parts of the maze, so you could never play the maze the same way twice. And but it was fun. Lenny loved games, as you know, and
the children still. I mean, they have this game.
Curiously enough, it's been lost. Yes, I have Itinerary, and I have the first game, which is called Diploma, but the maze got lost somewhere between the time they moved from the Park Avenue apartment to the Dakota, somewhere in there. I know it's sitting in some warehouse, someplace, wherever the artifacts are. It's very large. It's about like that. And I have the pieces, but not the maze. And I don't know who to ask to find it. I know it's there, and I even had to put in a wrapper like that, only made of a silver foil. And so it's hard to miss, but I had a good time inventing that.
Is there anything that you would like to say that I haven't asked you?
No, except that one of the qualities about Lenny, which everybody knows, and when I think, I was just free associating. I was thinking, all right, Lenny, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And the first thing that comes to mind is how much larger than life he was. I've never met anybody quite. I've met larger-than-life people, and it has to do with that exuberance and that energy, zest. Part of his egoism came from his own zest for himself, but it was zest. He was a very positive energy, I think, and yet he was full of negative things and full of jealousies and pettinesses and that sort of stuff, like all of us. But the general quality when I think of Lenny is largeness. And for a short man who was so concerned about his shortness, he never struck me as short.